Hello, sweet friends, and welcome back to the Quilter's Candy Shop, where you will find sweet treats for the discerning quilter. I am so glad you are here with us today because today we are going to finish up our Sunshine in a Pot quilt sew along. Last week, we were able to get all the pieces for this quilt cut out of a single 10-inch layer cake instead of having to buy an entire fat quarter bundle. This is going to save you over $20, and there was very little fabric left over, which means no waste. We used Promise Me by Michael Markle for Poppie Cotton, and these are available in our shop at the quilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. And you can pick up the 10-inch pack if you want leftovers. We've got fat quarter towers. And we also have quilt kits that include the pattern for free, along with the background and binding. So today we're going to get all those pieces that we cut put together, and we are going to start with the flower pot. Now, it's not too late for you to join our sew along. There's no cost or fees to follow us on YouTube, but you do have to purchase the pattern. That way you will get the yardage requirements, the specific cutting instructions, and we have to preserve the work product of the pattern for the designer as well as for copyright. Okay, let's get back to our flower pot. You may recall that I cut out my background pieces from a template with folded over fabric, which means I cut my left and my right at the same time. So now that I have these separated, let's get to sewing something sweet. All right, to assemble our flower pots, we are going to sew just on these two sides. It's very simple actually, but if you remember, we trimmed these particular angles on the corners of the pots, and there's also angles on the corners of the background. And now you'll see why those are so important to go ahead and cut, because they line right up. You get this point right up into this corner. This comes right along the edge. That would line up right perfectly as well. And then you take your scant 1/4 inch seam allowance right down this side. It is not going to come out to this point here. Just keep your seam a scant 1/4 inch away from the edge, and it's going to come out right down the center of this wedge cut, and it should come out just about, not exactly on that point, but just on this side of this point, because we're going scant. So I'm going to go sew one and bring it back so you can see what it looks like. Okay, and here it is all sewn on. This point matches up perfectly up here, and it matches down here, and it comes from this point a scant 1/4 inch all along this edge, and then it comes right down through the center of this little trimmed corner. So that is when you press this over, it lines up nice and flat across the bottom. These are a very odd angle, so be super careful when you're pressing. Well, let's finish all of these up and we'll move on to the next step. Also, I am going to take these two large stacks of squares to the sewing machine with me, because I am going to use these as a thread saver. So instead of using my little piece, I'm going to actually sew these in between sewing all of these pieces. Print square on the right, background square on the left, and sew them together. And also, if you have some directional fabrics, make sure that they're not like, here's this lantern right set up. Make sure you don't put it sideways. Make sure your lantern or your pumpkin or your hat is right side up. So I'm going to use these in between all the different pieces that I'm sewing today. And by the time I get done piecing all my flowers and pots and centers together, I'll probably have all 80 of these pieces put together in a pair. And here are my finished pots. And look, they are so cute. That was way easier than most people think. Templates aren't that hard. You just have to take them one step at a time and follow directions, and you can do it. All right, let's set those aside. The next thing we're going to work on is our flower centers. So you need this letter is A, and you need letter D as in dog, which are these that are going to go on the corners. These are just going to go on with a stitch and flip, which is pretty basic. So stitch and flip method is you mark your diagonal on here unless you have diagonal seam tape on your sewing machine. Mark your diagonal, stitch on the outside of the line for that scant seam allowance. This gets folded over like this, right? And then trim. So if you've never done stitch and flip before, there is really nice instructions inside the pattern that show what the stitch and flip method is. And I meant to show you, I got almost half of my stack of my squares done. So all of these are the scrappy squares. They all have a piece of background attached to the side. And so this is about half the stack. All right, and look at this little cutie. Oh, I just love it. I think these are going to turn out so cute. All right, here are the rest of my centers. Even though they're pressed, these little tiny corners, they curl back, but that's okay. And so now when we go to make these petals, you're going to use, this one is C, and this one is B as in boy. You're also going to need L and M. So now we're getting down to the really nitty-gritty piecing of the flower. These background pieces that are cut and labeled L, these squares get cut in half diagonally twice, from corner to corner and then the opposite way, corner to corner, making 4 triangles. Okay, so those go like that. And this set of squares goes right there. All right, so we'll be making this first step and then I'll show you how to press it. And here is the first step of our petals. So this is the square with the quarter square cut background, and I like to press these out and away. So you sew one side on, press it out, and sew the other side on. Scant quarter inch is important here, and you want to make sure you're double checking that you get a full quarter inch seam allowance from this point to the edge, because that's where your blocks are going to come together. So make sure these are pressed out really nice, and probably this one I could do a little better job on. Let's see if I got one in here. This is a great example here. This is where I did it right. So you can see I've got a full quarter inch right there. Okay, so this is just one for each. I've got 3 more for each to do, and we will be right back. So here I have all of my center flying geese, and you don't have to keep these set apart like this. I'm just doing it because how pretty they look. And then the next step is to add on the other part of the petal, which is to cut these in half. So same thing, I'm going to use my 45-degree angle line right here to help me get this good and lined up with this corner. Point to point, 45-degree line. Cut it in half. And now these, this one, are going to go right here to finish out. It's kind of a fancy flying goose, right? It makes this little point in the middle. There you go. All right, so here it is finished, and this is going to go right on the side like this. So get 2 for each center done, and they get added on the sides, and then we'll add the strips on the top and bottom. Okay, look how cute these are turning out. So I took a break from sewing petals so you can see once you get 2 for each one of your centers, go ahead and sew these on. So you just flip this over, scant 1/4 inch. Now I do want to point out, this is really important. If you're a beginner, when you're sewing through this, now this is why I like to press these out. I press these out so that the seam allowances are flat, and it makes this X right here. Now that X is the point of your square. It's going to be really tempting to sew right through that X, but no. You want to sew on just on the outside, like a scant, because we have to have enough room for that fabric, for that point to go up and over itself to make that point look right. If you sew, this would be lined up obviously, but if you sew right through the X, so if I do that and then I turn this over, you will get, it's harder to see with these prints I guess, but you will get a flat spot instead of a point. So it's better to be a little bit on the outside of it than too close on the inside. So that's what you're going to do for all of these guys. Okay, I've got all my little petal sets done, and now we add these corner squares in here. So these are going to get sewn together, these are going to get sewn together, and then this unit is going to get sewn on here. Now when I pressed this section, I pressed away from the petal and towards the inside on this one, on the center. So the seam allowances are going in. So on this one, you're going to stitch scant 1/4 inch right here, and then you're going to press these out, and that'll make these seams nest. All right, I have these all ready to go, so I am going to put these together and be right back. Okay, here are the 2 rows. Now this is going to flip over here, and these seam allowances are going to nest right in there, and then make sure you got this point matched up here, and the same on this side. You can take both those, put a little pin through this, but don't forget about your X right here. So go scant so you get that nice point, corners matched up nice, and the seam allowances nested. So there's a little more to remember on these 2 seams, but scant 1/4 inch, take it one step at a time. Each section, make sure it's in the right spot, and it will come out beautiful. Let's see. Okay, and there is my first little flower block. I just think they're turning out so dang cute. I can't wait to see what the rest of these look like. So when we get that done, we'll get started on the stem. And look at this. All of these cute little flower blocks are done. They turned out so cute. One might even use the word precious. Look at that. Okay, so now that our flower heads are done and our pots are done, and I've got them lined up where they are partnered, now that all that's left to finish our little flowers is the stems. This is going to be super easy because the stem units just go, I'm going to use this one as an example, right here. And then this piece K goes on either side. So you'll make 8 of these units, and they will connect to the bottom of the flower and to the top of the pot, making 1 flower unit, and you will end up with 8. Before we move on, I wanted to talk a little bit about processing this flower. There is quite a lot of bias in this block, especially around the edge. I did not use steam, but I did in the very end use a small amount of spray starch. I really think that helped to give it a little body and to keep everything flat and in place. I also took the time to put my ruler on and square up the block and trim up the edges. And you can see how nice they look now, because let me tell you, they were wonky. Not everything came out perfectly because I'm not perfect, but look how great they look now. And that is going to make your next few steps even easier. Oh, and one more note. Don't soak your squares with the spray starch. Just put a very light spray over the top. That's all you need to keep everything in place. Let's get our stems done and our flower units made, and we will come right back. All right, and there she is, my first finished flower in a pot. Also, I wanted to remind you, as you're making your stems and your flowers, keep working on your scrappy square pears, and for now just press all the seam allowances to the dark side. Now that we have our flowers in a pot all put together, let's talk about joining them to make our row. Let's take a look at the back of these blocks. On the flower block, I pressed open the last seam where you put the bottom row and the top row. I pressed open that seam, and you'll notice half of these are going to go across this way and half of them are going to go this way. The only thing you have to be careful of is if your center is a directional print, you'll want to make sure that that's laying whichever way, which is probably going to look like this. Those will have to be across like this. So just turn half of them so the seams are vertical. And then when you go to sew these two together, you're going to mitigate the bulkiness of this seam right here. We have one other seam allowance issue, and that is with this intersection right here. I'm going to share with you my secret seam allowance management technique that works every time, but it is a little controversial. I have all of these seam allowances from the flower pressed down because of this point. And we've got these 2 points as well. So this is a lot. So it really wants to fold this way. So all of them are pressed down. But then when you go to sew these together, you've got 2 that are side by side pressed down. So I take my little sharp scissors and just take a snip in this seam allowance. You don't go all the way to the thread. Well, you go as close to the thread as you can, but do not cut the thread. Obviously, you don't want to cut the seam, but you can go right up to the seam. Then you can press just this section up, and then these 2 will nest. And you can't tell on the front that you've done anything different. Everything looks great, and then these points all come together. So let me show you on one that I did not do that, my very first one that I put together. I even had it pinned. I thought it was all lined up, and look, because of the bulk, it pushed it down. Now, I am going to go in and take this apart, but I wanted to show you how easy it is for these to shift while you're sewing. So I'm going to take this apart, and I'm going to do the trick where I am going to snip this seam allowance right here. I'm just going to take my sharp scissors right to here. I'm going to snip it right up to the line. Now when I undo this, I'm going to move this one up, press it up, and then these two seams will nest. See, I did it on all of these and they all went right straight across. And because these went straight across, everything else fit in perfect. When this one went wrong here, everything else got wonky. So it's really going to make a difference that you get all of your seam allowances lined up and nested to get good outcomes for your whole row of 8. When I get that done, I'll come right back. And here is the whole row. Look at that. Aren't they cute? And they all match up nice together. That looks so, so, so cute. All right, so now that you've got this row together, just a quick little side note, the pattern also has instructions for how you can turn just the row of flowers into a table runner, which would be really cute. And I can imagine all of these flowers like in red, white, and blue for like a 4th of July. Or how about red and green like poinsettias for Christmas? So there's a lot that can be done with a simple row of flowers like this for a table runner. But we are making the quilt, so now we're just going to add along the top and bottom the sashing strips. So that is these guys. They're going to go on the bottom and on the top. So I'm going to put those on, and then all that's left is the checkerboard, and we are done with this quilt. All right, here is our whole row of potted flowers. They're so cute, and we've got the sashing on the top and the bottom, which is right here. So our next step is laying out these checkerboard sections, and this is going to be a cinch because I have a super fast and easy system for assembling these checkerboard sections with our scrappy squares that we've been working on. No big layout on the bed or on the floor. You can do this right at your sewing machine. So I've got all of my squares cut and sewn with a partner. And then what I did is I went through by color and I made 5 stacks. Now, clearly there's only 4 here because I've gone ahead and put one together. And so to spread out the blues and the greens and the pinks and the yellows, what I did was made 5 piles, and then I took all of my blues and I put one until I got them all spread out in the 5 piles. I did the same with the greens, the pinks, the yellows, and that way I know in every row is going to have a little bit of every print and a little bit of every color. Each pile needs 16 scrappy square sets, and we are going to make 2 rows of 8. Let's lay out one checkerboard section together. Take one of your assorted piles and separate them by color. Knowing that the directional pieces are going to have to go on the bottom, I started with that. And those have to go this way. And you need 8 different ones in each row. So the bottom row, the background is going to go to the left, and in the top row, the background is going to go to the right. So I am going to do my directional ones first. In my blues, these 2 are directional, so that's 2 blues, so I can put these. I'm going to put these 2 blues in the top somewhere. I'll move them around as we go, and I'll keep these 3 in the bottom. And I think I'll switch this one and this one. Okay. Now here's my green. I've got this one is a directional, so it has to go this way. Those look nice together. This one can go up here. This one is directional, so it has to go this way. I'm just going to stick it under there. And here's another directional, so I'm going to stick it down here on this end. Or maybe I'll stick it over here. All right, and now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I only get 1 more in this row, so I can pick whichever one I want. I think I'm going to go with this little stronger daisy. There you go. And so you just play with it until you get it how you like it. I'll put this one down here. So cute. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Perfect. So now I'm just going to sew pairs together, then fours together, and then I'll have this whole strip, and then sew those together. And then once you get this section done, it'll look like this. And then the sashing goes in between these checkerboard sets. So, all right, one step at a time. Let's get all of our squares together and lined up. I'm just going to take this whole row over to my sewing machine like this, and I'm going to work from one end to the other. And the same with this. Now, if you wanted to put one of these directional prints in the upper row, you certainly can do that. All you have to do is take this seam apart and put it on the other side. If you don't want to do that, which I did not want to do, I'm just going to use them in the bottom row. No one's ever going to know that only the directional prints are in the bottom row and all the other prints are in the top row, because it's all going to look scrappy. Okay, there's my two sections, and I'll be right back. Let's talk about pressing the checkerboard sections. When you made your scrappy square pairs, you put the print on the right and the background on the left, and I had you press your seams towards the dark side or towards the print. That means that these intersections will nest, and even better, the seam allowances on the bottom are going to go in the same direction that you are sewing, and you'll be able to manage the seam allowances more easily on the top as you sew down the long side of your rows. And then when your row is all sewn together, I just press the bottom down. Once you get all 5 of your checkerboard rows completed, you can start adding the sashing strips and start assembling the center of the quilt top. You can easily divide this quilt into 2 sections. There's the section that goes above the flower row and a section that goes below the flower row. Above the flower row, you are going to have 2 checkerboard sections that are joined with 1 sashing, and that gets attached to the top sashing above your flower row, and that section is complete. I'm just going to take and flip this over like this and take this to my sewing machine and sew a scant 1/4 inch down here with my seam allowances on the top and the sashing on the bottom. That will allow me to manage my seam allowances, and this is nice and flat on the bottom, which will give me a lot more control. All right, when I get that done, I'll be right back. Okay, and here is the top section complete. Now, for the bottom section, you need 3 checkerboards with 2 inner sashing. This along the bottom and across the top are the border. Don't add sashing on your top edge here or on the bottom of this checkerboard. We're going to do that with our borders. So let me get the bottom section completed and then we will do the borders. Okay, here's just a quick tip on the assembly of the bottom half. What I did is put together 1 checkerboard and put the sashing on both sides of it. Now all I have to do is add a checkerboard to the top and a checkerboard to the bottom. This section will be done and I will add it to my row of flower pots. All right, and here we go. This is the whole inside. My table's quite small, so you can't really see, but I have all the checkerboard and sashing done. And so now it's time to put on the borders. If you have followed the pattern for the construction of the quilt top, you should be able to cut your border strips to the lengths indicated in the pattern and apply them as directed. But if you have changed anything in the pattern or you have some concerns, You can always custom cut your borders, and here's how. Once the center of your quilt is complete, measure from the top to the bottom on both the left and right side of your quilt top. If they measure the same, congratulations, that's the length you will cut 2 border strips for the sides of your top. If you come up with 2 different numbers, measure again to be sure, and then take the average of those 2 numbers and cut both your border strips to that size. This will help square up your quilt top. Repeat the process for the top and bottom borders. Some beginners want to just apply the border, stitch across, and then cut it off. The problem is fabric stretches, sewing machines pull, things expand and shrink, and you will end up with a trapezoid or parallelogram quilt, and it will not look nice. This is the best way to get a good square quilt. And side borders first, top and bottom borders second. Not only make the best use of fabric, but make the strongest construction for your quilt top. Well, I'm going to get my borders on, and then we're going to lay this out on the bed and see how great it looks. And the last step is to sew a stay stitch all the way around the outside of your quilt. Not only is this going to help keep your intersections intact, but it's going to keep the edge of your quilt from fraying and from stretching out of shape. Trust me, your quilter is going to love you for it. And here it is. It's so cute. I just love it. Now, before I send this off to the quilter, for sure I'm going to have to give it a good pressing, and I've got a few strings to trim up, but otherwise it came out so cute. I hope you have enjoyed our Sunshine in a Pot quilt sew along. If you'd like to join us, you can pick up a pattern and a kit in our online shop at thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. And thank you for watching. Like and subscribe so you know when we start our next sew along. And stay tuned for more fun quilts, tips and tricks, and lots of sweet treats. Bye!